Former CKE restaurant CEO Andy Puzder joins us right now on the prospects of passing health care and tax reform, also on the impact of the Trump agenda on the U.S. economy. Andy, thanks for being here today. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Becky. Thanks.
So we've been chewing this around today. There are more senators who are voicing their opposition, given the CBO score to health care. We're trying to figure out what this means for health care getting passed in the Senate and then eventually, potentially in the House as well, and what that in turn means for tax policy, which we know tax reform is supposed to come after health care. What are your thoughts?
I think, look, Republicans have to pass health care reform. They absolutely have to pass tax reform. If we've got an election coming up in 2018 where every member of the House is up for re-election, and people are going to ask, look, if Republicans can't get the tax code reformed, why did we elect you in the first place? You've been promising health care reform for 7 years. If you don't deliver on that, why are we voting for you? And that can't be the way we go into the 2018 election. I think everybody in the House and Senate knows that. There's a lot of negotiating going on, but I think they'll get there. I agree with President Trump. I think eventually they get there.
You know, a few of these no's that we've heard from the Senate sound like they are fairly hard no's. I think you can probably count Rand Paul out at this point, Susan Collins potentially too, from opposite ends of the spectrum of the Republican Party. And you're right, there is a huge amount of pressure. They may be feeling the political pressure, but then you're also dealing with one-on-ones. And some of these, again, don't sound like they are trying to negotiate things, that they are really dead set against the entire policy. How does that shake out? How does that change?
I'd say a number of things. Number one, with someone like Susan Collins, Susan Collins she didn't support the nominees, including me and Betsy DeVos, for the cabinet. She doesn't always get behind Republican proposals, and I think that should have an impact on her when she comes up for re-election, but you may not get her. Rand Paul, on the other hand, I don't think Rand Paul wants to be standing there as the one person who prevented the Republican Party from passing health care. I don't think any Republican, other than maybe somebody like a Susan Collins, wants to be the person that's out there saying, I'm the guy who stopped it. I'm the person who didn't allow health care to be reformed when Obamacare, was collapsing. People's deductibles are shooting up. Their premiums are shooting up. We've got health insurers pulling out of the exchanges. The co-ops have collapsed. We're seeing a real death spiral. And if we don't do something, if we don't get behind some bill, I think Republicans are going to pay a price. And hopefully people in the Senate know that. And by the way, if you're negotiating, the one thing you want to appear like is that you're not negotiating. You want to look like you're taking a super strong position.
Sure.
So I do think people will come around.
I'm just trying to do the math, and I don't mean to belabor the small details on this, but when you've got somebody like a Senator Heller, who is up for re-election. He's the only one who is considered to be a senator potentially in a position of losing his seat. He was originally, earlier in the week, seen as somebody that they were going to give a pass to, that they didn't want to put him on the spot because his state has kind of turned against this health care reform bill. So if you've got that and Susan Collins, and then a Rand Paul or 3 or 4 others who kind of pop out, I guess you're anticipating that McConnell is going to be able to be very influential and get this through. Do you think it happens this week, or do you think it takes longer?
First of all, Mitch McConnell, if there's anybody that can get this done, it's Mitch McConnell.
Right.
Number 2, I don't know if it gets done this week, if it gets done by July 4th, or if it gets done later in the summer, later in July. I just think it will get done. I don't have a good feel for how soon it can get done. With all the people that are coming out and making comments that seem to be negative, you would think it would be tough to do it by July 4th, but we'll have to see. But Heller's, there's a lot of pressure on Heller now to get behind this bill. I've seen a number of things online and on radio and on TV that are putting pressure nationally on Heller. So we'll see what happens.
Andy, I want to sort of switch gears because there are 2 really interesting stories that came out in just the past few days. First of all, a study out of Seattle studying the impact of raising the minimum wage. They found that in Seattle, which actually tracks hours worked, jobs and hours worked by the lowest income people fell after the minimum wage hike. Los Angeles is about to raise its minimum wage July 1st. And then at the same time, there's a story about McDonald's replacing human cashiers with 2,500 kiosks. And I'm just wondering, you combine these 2 things together, and it seems like it's going to be really hard for these lower income workers out there faced with potentially being phased out because the minimum wage could be rising in their city. And then you have this other force of technology.
Well, and the study in Seattle showed, I think, that wages actually went down $125 a month for these people, or a week for these people. There's also a study out of Harvard that showed in San Francisco restaurants closed in very significant numbers as the minimum wage went up. So you've really got a lot of research now showing that in cities that are very financially successful, like Seattle and San Francisco, that increasing the minimum wage to $15 or even $13 has a very negative impact on employment. And you know, I've been saying, you know, for at least a couple of years now that if you keep this pressure on, the businesses are going to automate. And you not only see McDonald's announcing automation, but you see its stock price going up because investors understand that this is how the restaurant industry needs to react to increasing labor costs. So when you've got people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren out there pushing these massive minimum wage increases, all they're really doing is hurting the very people that need these jobs. They're really taking them out of the job market. And look, the minimum wage, if you don't have a job, is zero. And that's the place they're putting. Can you imagine what this wage, look at the impact it's having in Seattle and San Francisco. What if it were in Birmingham, Alabama, or Memphis, Tennessee? It would be devastating. So you're really seeing numbers that show that you just can't rationally do this. And I hopefully people in both parties will come around to that conclusion.
But Andy, wouldn't you say that President Trump's agenda is also pushing back against various free market initiatives, whether it's protecting industries that are declining just in order to keep those jobs on hand?
Well, I think, look, he's really been very, very supportive of the free market, particularly with respect to deregulation. We're seeing deregulation that we haven't seen in decades, and businesses are responding very positively. Business optimism is way up. More people are working. They're working at better jobs. Unemployment claims are down to 44-year lows. Median family income, household net worth. Last week, the sales prices for new homes and now 6 million job openings, all of those are at record highs. So you're really seeing the impact of deregulation and what impact that has on free markets, and you're seeing real economic growth, I think.
Andy, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.